we are going to be doing a series of interviews with different movement leaders, and I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and some specific questions about how they are contributing to the development of a united independent movement in this country. So we're going to dive right in. Larry, first kick off, just introduce yourself. Give us the background. Let me know who's on the stage.
My name is Larry Sharpe, and I am really handsome, and that's kind of all you should worry about, because what really matters is just the surface. So accept that. I'm teasing, obviously, but sadly, that's what we actually are looking at. Most people are looking at the surface, looking at whether someone has an R or a D by their name, or if they have that, that jersey. And I'm trying to make a change. I run for governor twice as a libertarian. I support independent candidates. I do a lot of work in independent spaces, and I'm trying to grow the independent movement because I think it's the future for America. A lot of people would agree with me. I know Christopher would too, for sure, that without it, we are slowly just decaying. Our nation is on a slow decay, and if we don't make some kind of change, it's just going to go into, it doesn't exist anymore in whatever format that we see it.
So Larry, get us into the tactical perspective. Mm-hmm. You've been at this for a while. You've been in the Libertarian Party. You're connected to fundraising with PACs. You've ran for office yourself. When you say we need to develop this movement, what are some of the key things that you think are going to move this movement forward?
Yeah, two things. Well, then add the last one, which we all know. People, purpose, and with those two, raise money, right? People, purpose, and then the last one is that's how you get money. People will say, Larry, it can't be about the money. Sadly, it is. If you can't raise money, you can't make impact. Impact's how you make money. I'm sorry, money's how you make impact, yeah. Well, they're both the same. Anyway, the idea is, with money, you make impact. So you say, well, Larry, I've got this great person. She's an amazing person. She knows her stuff. She's very good. Awesome. Does she have a purpose? No. She's going to struggle. Larry, I got this great idea, this great purpose. Do you have a face who can push that purpose? No, not really. I'm the policy person. I got a great policy. You need a person. Person plus purpose, and then add on to that money, and you can make impact. That's the key. When it comes to the independent movement, here's our biggest issue. We often focus on a method and not an outcome. If you want to draw people into your movement, you can't say, we have to do X. You have to say, we have to achieve Y. Oh, I want to achieve that too. How do you do it? You do it by doing X. You lead with the impact you want to achieve and then explain how you get there. And when the other two parties just go, well, other guy's bad. Yeah, but what about achieving the thing I want? The other guy is really bad. People will listen to you. I think that's how you grow it.
Where does the money come from?
Generally speaking, you'll find money come in two different levels, right? What someone would call maybe an average donor, someone who's given, say, $50, $25, $10, an average donor. And then the big donors, the people who drop $10,000 or more. The average person who's just going to give you $10, $15, which is a critical donor base. Please do not ignore the critical donors of the $10, $15. Those are your volunteers. Those are your people who are telling their friends. Those are your people who are making things happen. They can't give you more than $10, $15, but they know friends, they know things, they can be social media warriors, they can do all the things you need. Do not ignore them. Those people, generally speaking, want to be part of something bigger. You have to remember that. You can't run your campaigns like a business necessarily. You've got to run it like a passion project. When those people feel like they're connected, you connect to them, they will give you the $10 and they'll keep going. That's level number one. The second is the big donors. Big donors, they're investing in you. They are. You might say, well, he gave $10,000. Let me be very clear. If someone can give you $5,000, $10,000, they're not going to miss it. I'm being very forward. If someone stretches to give you 50, they might miss it. That person who gives you $5 or $10, they may not be able to get a Starbucks that week. That's true. Someone can give you $5 or $10 grand, they'll be fine. They're paying their bills, they'll be fine. I'm not saying dismiss them. I'm saying don't think of them the same way. They are investing in you. They want some form of impact, whatever that might be. They might go, well, Larry, I can't win my race, or Larry, I can't get my bill passed. That may not be what they want. They may want you to just push something forward, do something that makes some kind of impact. In that case, whenever you do something, you've got to measure what the win is. Is the win getting 5% in a race? Is the win changing a tax rate? Is the win stopping some bad licensing you don't like? Is the win getting someone else to run behind you? Is the win gaining ballot access? We hear about ballot access all the time, right? Is the win gaining ballot access? The people who give you bigger dollars want some type of impact. Those people want that too. The last piece I bring up is the single issue voter. The single issue voter is very important. In an independent world, we can do something very good. We can get a coalition of single issue voters, right? I only care about, a common thing for Bobby was medical freedom. That's what I care about. That's my issue. If you can get those people together with other people who care about something, now you make that coalition of the single issue voters. Those people will give as long as you push their issue. Whatever they care about, push their issue, they will give you money. That's where the money comes from.
Do you have a couple examples of those issues beyond health freedom?
Sure, you can look at that, but also Second Amendment. There's a lot of people who are very hard on the Second Amendment. If you want to make sure you can keep the Second Amendment free, oh my God, they will support you, they'll get behind you easily. Happens all the time. On the left, it's Medicare for all. You look at Medicare for all on the left, oh my God, people love Medicare for all on the left. That happens too. The right, it's usually Second Amendment or something like that. It doesn't matter where it is. But the problem is, how do you get someone to get together if one person wants Medicare for all, one person wants medical freedom, one person wants the Second Amendment? That's where the person draws them all in.
Yeah.
That's when the person draws all of them in. Right? If you have the right person, they can bring them all in. And that's why it's purpose and person.
Larry, what's your role of leadership in the next 10 years in developing the independent movement?
What happens in the independent movement often is people run, they get their butt kicked, and they leave. It's a common thing. Running for office is brutal. It really is. So I've done it twice. So Larry, what's wrong with you? Clearly I have a mental disorder. Something's wrong. I don't know. I'm crazy, stupid, brave, I don't know what I am. Something. Any case, my goal was to keep running and to keep encouraging people to run and to keep getting people to see the value in running. I also try my best to let people know how you communicate. When you communicate as an independent, the goal is not to focus on being independent. The goal is not to focus on anything except the outcome you want. I cannot stress that enough. Focus on the outcome that you want. You're winning when you're talking to people if they think that you are their party. Right? So if they're Democrat, they go, you must be a Democrat, you're winning. If they're Republican, they go, you must be a Republican, you're winning. The goal is to get them to believe that you and them share the same outcomes. Now they'll start talking. I do that, if you see me, some of you see me do conversations, talk to people about this, I focus on outcomes. That's the issue. If you focus on outcomes, you can get people to join you. That's what I do.
And so tell us more, actually, what do you intend to do in the next 10 years specifically?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah.
10 years, what are you trying to kill me?
No, just, I mean, we gotta keep going, right? I want to ask you, like, what...
I've already given, like, I'm teasing.
You got 10 more. What's your role of leadership in
Yes.
the U.S. independent movement in the next 10 years?
Yes. No, the odds are I will run again. That's the odds. I probably will run again. I don't mind taking the slings and arrows. I don't mind being in front of people like this. So I will probably be running again. I might run for governor again in 2026 in New York State. I did it twice before. I might try it again. My goal was to work on ballot access because I believe ballot access is a key. If you can't get on the ballot, people do not see you as legitimate. And you might think, Larry, that's crazy. It's true. So I want to help anybody who wants to focus on ballot access, whether that's a PAC, whether that's a candidate, whether that is an independent group. Ballot access is key. For many of you who don't know this, Bobby Kennedy Jr. spent $20 million on ballot access and probably couldn't have gotten in all 50 states. And his last name's Kennedy. You have a guy whose last name is Kennedy, who has $20 million, and he struggled. How can anybody do that? But I'll go one step further. He did all of that, and you might go, well, Larry, it's the rules. The Democrats did not have to do that. The Republicans did not have to do that. That is only for independent candidates. Let me say it again. If you are a Democrat or Republican, you just get on the ballot. You have to do nothing. This is utterly unfair, utterly unconstitutional, totally wrong. Why would I want people on the ballot? Because if you have a third party in that room, an independent party in that room, by default, there is a referee. Here's what happens every single time, Democrat, Republican. Oh yeah, look, I know I killed a guy, but Chris killed 3 guys. So, I mean, you want to vote for a murderer or a mass murderer? I mean, come on, I'm just a murderer. That's the way we actually are. But now I've got another person in the room, right? So now Kyle's in the room too. And they go, well, I got murderer, mass murderer, and some guy who's killed nobody that I know of. Some guy who's killed nobody. Huh, I like that guy. So now him and I have to actually have ideas. And you saw that whenever Bobby Kennedy was in the room with others. They had to talk about actual ideas. The independent movement causes politicians to have to talk about ideas which can solve. If you've noticed this, I'll give a last piece if I could. In the past 25 years, remember this. Bush got us Obama. Obama got us Trump. Trump got us Biden. Who's winning? Not us. They are. And in those last 20, 25 years, the Democrats have controlled the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court at one point, so have Republicans. If you're on the left, where's your Medicare for all? Nowhere. Where's your codification of Roe v. Wade? Nowhere. If you're on the right, great. Where's your balanced budget amendment? Nowhere. Where's your change of border law? Nowhere. You don't get what you want because they fight each other. They don't want to solve anything, so they can yell at you and make you believe that the other guy's evil. Get an independent in there. They will have to actually solve problems. That's why I'm fighting to keep running for office, to support ballot access, and to raise money, because if you raise money, you can make impact.
What if ultimately Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden ultimately gets us independence? Because it created enough of a tension that it brought the movement forward. Thank you very much.
Hold on, touch real fast.
Oh, okay.
Last second, I want to be clear. You have a very valid point. People don't change because things are bad. That's not why they change. They change because things are bad, and there's hope. Mm-hmm. And my friend, you are creating hope. That's how we change.
Thank you, brother. Larry Sharpe, everyone. Thank you, buddy.
Guys, thank you.
It's an absolute honor to have you up on the stage, Jackie. And
thanks, Christopher.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
So, Jackie, tell us, just remind us a morsel about your background. And what I really want to talk about is the role of leadership you intend to have over the next 10 years in further developing the U.S. independent movement.
I grew up in New York City. I was born in 1953 and went to public school, went to college for a year. I didn't like college. Got a job working for the ABC National News Network as a secretary to the network correspondents. Loved that. Got to travel. Got to learn what it was like to deal with a corporate hierarchy in the news business. That was an education right there. Better than college. And I became involved in community organizing efforts of one kind or another. My family had been very political, very involved in civil rights, education reform, voting rights issues. And from there, the path led into a variety of doorways into independent politics. Yeah.
And so you've been in this for decades, and now here we are, and now we're looking at the next 10 years of this journey.
Yeah.
What do you see coming, and what type of positive influence do you want to make to help to be able to create the best possible outcome for this movement and the future of our country?
Well, something that I have learned to do over 40 years in this activity is to help formulate questions that are the building blocks of creating a movement. Okay. I think how you formulate your questions is really important. And it's not always obvious and not always the easiest thing to do. So I see questions that are coming up on the horizon that I think are important and that will shape the rise of the independent movement.
Do you guys want to know what question she's thinking about?
Yeah, can I share
Give us the
some of them?
goods.
Okay. So I was here when Del Bigtree spoke, and of course I've followed his work, and this is the first time I heard him speak live, and very, very impactful in many ways. And I was also thinking, it made me think about the point that he was making about, in some sense, the origin or the source of independence is with the individual person. And I think that's true. And I think there's another dimension to the rise of an independent movement as well. I think there is the action of the individual, and there is also the action of the collective. the collective vision, the collective strategy, the collective pathway and marshaling of resources. And so I'm very interested in the relationship or the dynamic between those two things, between the individual and the collective. To me, that's very, very important. And as someone who's spent a lot of years being involved in developing different strategies and different kinds of strategies for locating, developing, and building the power of an independent movement, I think that interconnection is really important. So I was very glad to hear Del emphasize the piece that he was emphasizing, but I don't think it's complete. I think it needs to be completed. And so I'm hoping that that question of how to interconnect those things becomes a self-conscious question that we work on in the
I'm very motivated and inspired by that, and that's why the name of the organization is United Independence, to be able to bring us into that dialogue and that question of what is the united part? What is the context for unification where we maintain our own? I think there's an evolution actually occurring in the political process where in this previous phase, you were an individual that plugged into another ideological system that kind of told you the things that mattered, versus this new path where we're saying, no, I want to maintain my own personal sovereignty and independence as far as what matters to me, but I also want to be working together with other people who also care that way. So there's that like beautiful tension between unification and independence. And I also shared with you on the front end of this event the outline for a survey for the United Independent platform. So we're doing our best to take steps in the direction of creating that space. What driving questions or advice would you have to us as we are wanting to navigate that space between the individual and the collective in a larger independent movement?
Yeah, well, that's a big one. I have two thoughts about it, and I hope they're not mutually exclusive.
We can handle it if they are.
No, exactly. Human beings do have the capacity to hold two conflicting thoughts and beliefs.
Well, I mean, that holding of that paradox is usually that bursts a whole new perspective.
Yes,
so
no, exactly,
let's name the paradox.
Exactly right. Okay. So one piece is that, and I was sharing this with some people earlier, a foundational component of the argument that defends the two-party system, right, is that the two-party system creates a level of stability in the United States of America that has enabled us to prosper, to create wealth, to become a world power, to be able to have, relatively speaking, up until recently, a stable society, et cetera. And so, in my involvement in independent politics over many years, I'm not an attorney, but I've been involved in multiple court cases and litigation where we've had to go to court on ballot access issues, on the structure of debates, on the right to call your campaign committee what you want to call it, on the rights of independent voters, on the structure of the primaries, et cetera, and so forth. And very, very, very consistently, when we lose a case, it is more often than not the case that the court will rely on the following idea. Yes, the Constitution says free and equal, et cetera, and so forth, even though political parties are never mentioned in the Constitution. But ultimately, we have to give a higher level of recognition and support to the two-party system. We have to relegate minor parties, independents, independent candidates, et cetera, to a second-class status because it is that primacy of the two parties that creates the stability from which we have all prospered.
Do you agree with that assessment, that stability, that two-party system has been useful to us?
One of the really important things about what's happening in our country right now is that has been turned on its head.
It's broken.
And it's now the case that the two parties and the two-party system is the source of the instability, which is paralyzing our country, which is pitting people against each other, and which is creating an environment in which there is no incentive to solve problems. And so I think
let's give them a moment. They're really into that.
I think I'm just fascinated by that. And so then I think that part of what we have to do tactically and strategically is to find ways to press that issue, to press the fact that while the two parties produced a certain kind of circumstances for Americans, a certain kind of privilege life for Americans in terms of stability, not in terms of wealth distribution, but in terms of a certain kind of social stability, that it's now the case that unless and until we can crack up the two-party system and replace it with something else, the level of instability is going to grow. And that, I think, has to become an important message that we bring out. The other thing I would say, and you and I had a brief exchange about this, which I think is related, though not exactly the same as this, is that I think I shared with you that, during the Reform Party years, I became close to Pat Choate, who was Ross Perot's vice presidential candidate in his second run in 1996. And for those of you who don't know Pat was a very, very prominent economist who signaled the dangers of globalization and its negative impact on the American worker and on the American people and so forth, and really laid down a lot of, I think, some of the critical prescient thinking about that, while the two parties in various forms were opening the doors to globalism and to a globalist, driven economy. So Pat was very smart that way. And Pat and I eventually parted ways as the Reform Party was going through a very, very intense internal battle, and we were on opposite sides of that. And we ceased to be close after that. However, one of the things that Pat Choate has said, and he articulated this, I think, very well in a book that he wrote about 9 years ago called Saving Capitalism. He said, fundamentally, the American people have not decided what we want to do about capitalism. They haven't figured that out yet. And, we all know it's kind of like free market capitalism on one side and socialism on the other, and those are the choices and so on and so forth. But in some ways, Pat was saying, we've got to push the envelope on that because capitalism as a system has produced a level of wealth. Its ability as a wealth creation system is unmatched. Its capacity to distribute wealth is horrendous. The levels of poverty, the levels of suffering, the income inequality, the income gap that now exists in our country is perilous. Perilous. And in this way, I am aligned with Pat's view. I think the American people have to make some choices and decisions about how we want that system, which generates so much wealth, to operate in such a way as so that it benefits all the people of our country. We cannot sustain the level of poverty that exists in this country today. We cannot do it. We cannot do it for moral reasons, we cannot do it for political reasons, and we cannot do it for economic and survival reasons. So when I think about the questions for the independent movement, going back to that, I think one of the things that the independent movement has to do is to create an environment where the American people, and I'm not just talking about a handful of American people, I'm talking about everybody, has to make a set of decisions and choices about how we want all of that to run and how we want all of that to work. And I think it's pretty clear right now that the Democratic and Republican parties will not allow that conversation to take place. It must take place. And so my hope, and going back to your question, what role do I see myself playing? I'm not that young. I would like to slow down a little bit. I'm a playwright now. I really love the theater. I want to go write my plays and do all that. But I would like to the extent that it makes sense, I would like to be a part of helping to frame those questions and help build the environments in which we can create the answers to them.
Jackie, I would love to work with you to achieve that objective and that outcome. And the common theme that I saw in both examples of the two-party system and the capitalism reference you made is like an intergenerational metaphor that they served a purpose, and then it's time for something else to pick up. And so in that, we can honor them for what they've been, and we can also kind of release them from the charge that they've carried, and as a rising generation, assert, without asking permission, say, we're here now, we're looking at those dynamics of economic systems, and we're actually creating new solutions. And we are looking at this problematic duopoly we've had, and we're asserting independence. I think it's time for us to no longer ask for permission, but to step up and just create it and know that we have the power, and that the people always have the power when they know that they have the power and when they're willing to work with each other over a consistent period of time to assert the change they see as most useful for their future.
Well, you're doing a great job there.
Thanks.
Thank you for organizing this amazing event.
Thank you, Jackie. All right, Jackie Salit, everyone. She's not going anywhere. She's going to be our, elder and guide as we continue to move forward. Okay, so David Sherry, very nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you as
Thanks
well.
for coming.
Thank you very much.
I'll tell you the line that Jackie told to me when she suggested that you be a part of this event. I think it'll be a nice jump-off point for your share today.
Okay.
So she said that David gets that the ultimate conclusion or development of the civil rights movement is moving that conversation deeper into independent politics.
Yes.
So just take it away from there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, I'm a child of that era. I was born in 1960. My birthday is September 30th, and and if I survive the next 12 days, I'll be 64 years old. So thank you. So my father was from South Carolina. He was born almost. I was born 6 days short of his 50th birthday. So he was born in 1910 in South Carolina. My mother was born in Alabama, Mobile, Alabama. They met in New York City, where I was born. So my father met Malcolm X in 1959, and he used to go to different rallies. He would attend the meetings and join the organization Afro-American Unity, and would bring me to different rallies with Malcolm X. And I was a toddler back then, and my father was president when Malcolm X was assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom, February 21st, 1965. And my parents were so supportive of all the various movements, whether it was Malcolm X, whether it was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's civil rights movement, Robert Kennedy's campaign in 1968, lasted 3 months before he was assassinated. We lost King and we lost Robert Kennedy within 2 months of each other in 1968, which is quite incredible. But the one thing I learned from my parents was that the civil rights movement the goal was to lift people out of poverty. And I appreciate your remarks you made earlier, because the goal of Dr. King, the goal of Robert Kennedy was to end poverty, so that we wouldn't have to, not to engage it, not to learn to live with it, not to reduce it, but to end poverty so that no American would be living in poverty in this country. And, and the debate was, as short-lived as it was how to do that. But after the King assassination, after the Kennedy assassination, this country really hasn't dealt seriously with that issue of poverty. But the one thing that the people who led the civil rights movement and the movement for voting rights was to give opportunities for black people to have choices. An idea would be, you might have, Democrats and Republicans and independents, all sharing ideas about what they would do to make the communities better. Campaigns should be an exchange of ideas, not just horse races between the two major parties, but what it would mean to have multiple candidates really competing for our votes. And that's been turned on its head, like what's happened over the years is that the Republican Party has made a calculated decision that they're not going to get very many black votes. And then that's led the Democrats to just say, well, we could just take black votes for granted. And this has been the conundrum for almost the past 60 years, and it has left people in many of the communities I'm familiar with, starting in Harlem and the South Bronx, New York, and now I'm in Chicago, it's left these communities devastated because the one thing that I realized as a young person was that the candidates of the two major parties only care about winning elections. They don't care about poor people. They don't care about working class people. By the time we got to the 1980s, I was in my 20s and didn't even care about voting because I realized even as a young man, neither one of these parties is going to rescue the community. They only care about elections. And what prompted me to vote for the first time was when Reverend Jesse Jackson ran for president because he talked about lifting up the boats at the bottom. He talked about the people living in the projects. He talked about the people who are living and suffering in poverty. And so I registered to vote, supported Jackson. In 1988, after the Democratic Party made it clear that Jackson's agenda was not going to be part of their general election campaign and that Jackson and his the people he represented, constituents like me, were more of a drag on the Democratic Party, and they decided to go in a different direction. I went in a different direction too, and then that's when I started supporting the campaign of Dr. Lenore Fulani. I met Dr. Fulani 35 years ago. I met Jackie Salit 35 years ago, and I've been a proud independent ever since.
Mm-hmm. And why do you see that independent politics is a solution? Why is that different?
Well, from what I've, over these past 35 years, the most principled people, and I say this in all honesty, the most principled people that I've met are people who are in the independent movement. These are people who really care about making our country better. These are people who really want to, support those now 65% of the country now lives paycheck to paycheck, which is an astonishing thing when you think about it. 65% of the country lives paycheck to paycheck. 40% of the country doesn't even have $400 in the bank, to pay an emergency bill. But the independents, and again, this is from my own personal experience, not, these are the most principled people in this country. And that includes, people who identify, as libertarians, as Green Party, as the Forward Party. Yeah. It's a variety of people from the whole spectrum, and just having various conversations, these folks want nothing better than to do what's best for the country. Not winning elections necessarily, even though winning elections would be great, but the most important thing is supporting our democracy and supporting the people of this country.
So here's my final question for you. So our intent is to assemble and develop and add fuel to a united independent movement,
Yes.
which represents the parties you mentioned. It also represents all different types of social networks and causes that are all looking for some form of systemic transformation away from aspects of the status quo that they're fundamentally discontent with and declaring independence from.
Yeah.
So bring us home with this notion, this conversation that's been happening in this room today about developing a united independent movement and other networks or communities that you represent that have their own interests and connections. How do we bring all that together to create more unification, more collaboration, and a stronger, broader national movement?
Well, I think the independent movement is the only political movement that can help to complete the unfinished business of the civil rights movement. And so when you look at it, again, the political parties are just concerned about winning elections. Whether it lifts a single person out of poverty or not, they're only concerned about winning elections. Again, independents are very principled people. Independents will, will make collaborations with other people. And the civil rights movement was always about lifting up the entire country, so that people walk. I mean, one of the last things that Dr. King was continuing to work on was what he called building a beloved community, and that was a community of people of all races, of all religions that support each other. So that I support you. If you're down, I'll stand with you and support you and lifting you up. And that was the goal, was to have this multiracial, beautiful kaleidoscope of people. And the independent movement are independents are the only ones who are in that position, to have the freedom, to have the independence to do what's in the best interest of this country. And one of the groups that I'm with, I'm president of an organization called the Leaders Network. It's a group of faith and community leaders on the west side of Chicago. And we had a great meeting a couple of years ago where Andrew Yang, Lindsey Draft, both came to the west side of Chicago to speak to this group of mostly black ministers, although the Leaders Network has, Jewish and it has white Christians, it's a multiracial interfaith organization. And this grouping, has spent so many years working with the Democratic Party, and yet we see the suffering of the west side, the poverty, the abandoned buildings, the vacant lots, the hopelessness, the dilapidated schools, the dilapidated housing. And there's so much openness to saying we're ready, to build a coalition with some independents at this point, who can help move our community forward. So I'm committed to being in this movement to stay. I've had a nice opportunity to meet a number of people here, and and I'm proud to be an independent. And I say that to as an American, I'm so proud of so many independents who, despite all odds, despite attacks from the news media, despite attacks from the leaders of the major parties, 51% of the people of this country now say, I am an independent, and I'm proud to be independent, and you're not going to make me join a political party that I don't want to be a part of. Right. So I think that the future is really bright for those of us, and I appreciate you for convening, this gathering of folks. And what a group, what a wonderful group of people. I've only had a chance to speak to a few people, but when I see the grouping that's here, I know the future is bright. I know there's so many unlimited possibilities, and more and more people are coming around to the notion that, we can build a beloved community inside the independent movement and take that beloved community, outside to the whole country. What would it mean for all of us to care about each other, for all of us, straight people concerned about the LGBTQ community, what it means for, Christians to be concerned about Jews, and Jews be concerned about Muslims, and black and white and Latino and Indian and indigenous people. Like, we all see each other as sisters and brothers, And so I think that's the kind of community we can build in America. America's in a unique opportunity, has a unique opportunity to lead the way not only to create a better America, but create a better world.
Thank you so much. Let's end where we started with the question around civil rights and the African American community. Could we go as far as to say that the Democratic Party has been the kind of de facto home for the African American community for the last several decades, and that the independent movement can be the future home for that community?
Oh, absolutely, because like I said, many people gravitated toward the Democratic Party, when the Republicans made a calculated decision. Many Republicans, not every Republican, but many Republicans made a calculated decision that, we're not going to get very many black votes, so we're not going to even make an appeal to the black community. So many people went into the Democrats, and the Democrats are more than willing and welcoming to say, you can be part of our political party. Not that we're going to do anything, but you can help us to win elections. And the older you get, the more you realize that that is all they want from us, is to help us to provide their winning margins with winning elections. But there's no intent, to end poverty. There's no intent to lift people, out of the very dire conditions that they're experiencing. There's no intent to reverse the fact that 65% of the people live paycheck to paycheck. The independent movement is the one political movement in this country that has the principled people who want to do what's best for this country. This is the movement, and it makes up the Forward Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, people who are currently supporting, or, Cornel West, or people who supported Robert Kennedy, people who support Jill Stein, people who support Chase Oliver, all the various independents, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, you are the people who are the Americans who care about making America a better place for all of us. And so I think that I feel that there's so many opportunities, and a growing number of people, despite attempts to lock people inside the Democratic Party, a growing number of people saying, no, I'm not going. I'm going to go independent. And I know the future is going to be extremely bright for the independent movement.
David Chair, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
You got it.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, buddy. All right, so we're going to move right on into Jonathan Hiller. The Jonathan Hiller.
The Kennedy clan, black sheep.
Give us the kind of 30 seconds on your background.
Sure.
Who are you?
First of all, thank you, Christopher Life. Christopher Life is like an onomatopoeia, because when I think of the word life, I see Christopher's face. Isn't he just like a shining example of life? He's just a beautiful guy. I've only known him for 3 weeks, but I've just had such a good time getting to know him. So my background is it's kind of interesting. I go down obsessive rabbit holes. So I started as a commercial director, a cinematographer, doing 30-second broadcast ads, and then eventually saw the writing on the wall with digital. This was the 08-09 digital movement. So I started a digital marketing company, and that made my way into politics. And I was on the Dem side in 2016 for about a year, and then saw the writing on the wall there. Left the Democratic Party, went into sort of political exile for about 7 years, went back to producing films. And then around a year and a half ago, a good friend of mine, Charles Eisenstein, I found was helping Mr. Kennedy out with his messaging. And I called him up. I said, what's going on here? Who is this guy, Bobby Kennedy? And he's like, just look into him. Just, read a few interviews, look at some podcasts. So I did, and I said, okay, this is very interesting. I've been unaffiliated independent for a very long time. I really see something beautiful here. And he said, okay, just go out and just meet him and maybe make a few videos with him. So I did that, and I found just a beautiful soul. Everything Dell said about Bobby Kennedy is absolutely true. he looked at me in my eyes and said, "I'm so grateful for you," like within 2 days of knowing me. And I was like, what? This is a politician? Like, who is this guy? And then I spent the next year and a half as the director of content for Team Kennedy for RFK Jr.'s independent campaign. And in the end, decided that I felt it was everything I feel Del Bigtree said was true, and I couldn't support the strategic move toward endorsing President Trump. So yeah, and I'm here now to help make sense of what happened. I think anytime a massive thing happens, a huge ripple effect in any party or movement happens, we all need to get together and just talk and make sense of it. I do not believe that can happen online. I used to. To me, one of the greatest issues that I feel that no one is really talking about is the polarization everyone is talking about. To me, the main driver, it is a feature, not a bug. And it is a feature of social media. And social media, it's like we think of social media, but social media is actually humanity's first contact with AI in the form of a curation algorithm. And what is that curation algorithm? Well, first of all, who thinks humanity's first contact with AI is going particularly well? Show of hands. Yeah, not great. I don't think it's going very well. And that's because we incentivize outrage based on an engagement economy. And so essentially what you see happening is what's happening, which is false information travels 6 times faster than true information. Incendiary information, if you include one incendiary word in a tweet, your engagement on Twitter goes up by 16%. Imagine if you add 8. So to me, what we see is this is the playing field. And I'm a huge fan of Tristan Harris's research, if you're familiar with him. The Center for Humane Technology, I think, is a beautiful, beautiful effort to try to revamp some of these technologies, because we go in this direction and we go from the first encounter with AI, which is curation AI, and now we're going into generative AI with curation AI based on an engagement economy. That's scaring to me. That's very, very scary to me. So to me, where that leads me now with the independent movement specifically was, okay, so if engagement brings out the worst of the brainstem in us, then how do you bring someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into the conversation, who is a centrist, an academic, someone who thinks deeply about issues? Where is that in the playing field? And what we found when we started to really A/B test a ton of data with just a ton of content was, if you have a rational actor and you just place them within the outrage conversation, the outrage rhetoric, it still trips the algorithm, and you get someone who's saying some really interesting stuff in the conversation. So for instance, if you write the word vaccine in a description, what do you think happens? The algorithm goes, "Rink," because it's an outrage word. But if you actually see what he said about vaccines, if you really, really listen to what he's saying, whether you agree with him or not, it's not inflammatory rhetoric. It's very well researched, again, whether you agree with him or not. And so essentially what we started to see was, oh, you take a centrist, academically oriented, very moderate human being in a lot of ways, and you have them speak, and we didn't do this necessarily, it's just who Bobby is, but you clip basically social media bites and you put them out there based on what he's saying that can connect to something that is outrage oriented. And this is what I think is the future of the independent movement, and I'm getting there. But essentially what I feel like is you have to play with the playing field that I think is broken, insofar as you can do that without using the inflammatory rhetoric, but you have to play in those inflammatory fields. until those algorithms change. And I hope they do eventually, because I don't see a very bright future with the way that social media is currently set up, because it does iterate on itself exponentially. And you've seen this in the last 10 to 15 years. We are getting, if you made a bell curve of a distribution of the left and the right, they used to be like this, basically over each other. And now they're getting pulled further and further left and further right. And to me, yes, that is political polarization on a systemic level, but I also think that is a digital political polarization.
Right.
So,
let me ask a couple more questions, this next will be a two-part question, but kind of give me a fusion on it, and then I've got one more question for you. So, part A is you made a video recently about really calling for the development of independent movement. You referenced it as independent works. So the question there is, why does that matter to you? Like, from your vantage point, we've all been talking about it all day long, but from your vantage point, why does the further development of the independent movement and independent identification matter? And part two, from the lens of a filmmaker and a storyteller, how do we do the best job possible of telling that story and getting that story out there?
it's a very good question. I think we're still figuring it out. To me, the first part is, why does that matter, is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. changed the rhetoric of both candidates, both sides. I think for the better. The MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, that would not exist without Bobby Kennedy. That entire conversation about medical freedom, about health, as being fused into the MAGA movement, and whether or not I agree with Donald Trump as a person, I do think that's a beautiful thing. And so I do think independence, to a point that I heard earlier, independence infuse a conversation about issues into typically social conversation about issues that don't really matter to most of us. And I think, to me, that is a beautiful thing. And it matters to me because I also see the numbers, and I'm a data nerd, but I do see, to your point, Christopher, that as time has gone on, people are getting fed up. And this is institutional fed up. This is, you see, my mother's a minister. She's a Presbyterian minister. And attendance, in a religious sense, it has been going down because a trust in institutional religion is going down. Whether or not that's good or bad, it is what it is. And so what do we do with that? Well, we have to create something different. This is every time there's a new technology, you have to create new guardrails. New privacy wasn't a thing before cameras. Like, no one had a right to personal privacy before essentially the mass production of cameras. And so now we're in a really strange space of what are the new guardrails to digital sharing of our lives, to instant access to everything, to almost unlimited access to people. And to me, that an independent is the only kind of person that can wade into the complexities of something that we've never seen before. And again, this is the first generation of AI, but the second one's going to be, I don't even know. I honestly have no idea. I'm not an AI researcher, but it's going to be insane. So to me, the only person that could really handle that is someone that is thinking independently, someone that is making good choices, someone that's not beholden to corporate interest, corporate power, everything that we've been talking about. The only person that can actually handle the next exponential tech revolution is an independent, and that's why I think I'm here and believe in this so much.
Do you agree with the statement you just made? Final question for you. If you look out over the next 10 years in the development of the independent movement, or as I articulated, a united independent movement, what do you see as your role of leadership development?
Yeah. I want to be, as I've always said this, however I can be most useful. That has looked different in different ways in different sectors. I've worked in tech, I've worked in startups, I've worked in politics. To me, my participation in the independent movement specifically is around I'm a person that obsesses about incentives. This is the difference between saying deep state or saying corporate power, corporate capture, sorry. Deep state is basically an amorphous enemy that we can't quite understand. But to me, corporate capture is an incentive system. Like that actually is something that we can talk about. That is something that we can change. I'm interested in incentives, not necessarily rooting out the human beings, because if you root out the human beings that are the bad actors, new bad actors will come in if the incentives are incentivizing bad behavior, right? It's true, you see it in every system, in every single system that has ever existed. When human beings have gotten together, human beings are not the actuaries on the system. The incentives are the actuaries, the human beings are the behavior. So to me, we have to think about this movement as how do we incentivize the behavior that we want to see? And over again, the thing that was the most difficult to get over message when I talked to volunteers on the ground was, I love him, but he can't win. And so how do you change that? How do you change an incentive system that says the two parties are too strong, he cannot win? To me, you look at ranked choice voting, you look at open primaries, you look at the ways in which, so instead of a lesser of two evils approach, you say, oh, well, in a ranked choice system in ballot measure 2 that was passed in 2020 in Alaska, you say, well, if you like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., if he's really your vote of conscience, you vote for him 1. And then if you really don't want Harris to win, you vote Trump 2. And then you have Harris 3. So that automatically takes out the spoiler narrative. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking at in 2026, is how can we get as many of those ballot access measures onto the ballot in 26? And if we can get 2 states, that's a huge deal. If we could get 10, I think we can get 20. I really do. Because it's like my job is, if you get it on the ballot, if you get the signatures, I'll convince the people to vote for it. That's my job.
As a storyteller.
As a storyteller.
Yeah.
Like, I'll convince them they're going to want that. But we got to get it on the ballot. So that is what I see in 26. In 28, I truly think you see the first independently elected president since George Washington.
Let's go.
I believe that.
Let's go.
So.
Jonathan Hiller, everybody. So stick around for a second. So we just finished our first block of expert conversations. We're shifting the model from group panels to just being able to get each of these experts to give you the direct message. We're going to take like a 2-minute break. Don't go anywhere. And we've got another batch of incredible experts coming down the pipe. What's that? They want a panel. They want a panel. Great. We're gonna do that panel in just about a couple minutes. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.